All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Chapter 1 Notes, and this is something I'm trying to do here for you, see if it gets used. If it does get used, I'll continue to make these PowerPoint presentations for you that you can download online and watch, so we're not taking additional class time to review them. We've got 40 slides to get through here, and I'll try to do it in a reasonable amount of time so you're not sitting here for the next 2 hours watching this. But this is Chapter 1. Environmental problems, their causes, and sustainability. The first thing that we start off with here is this core case study about a transition from what we're at right now to a more sustainable, cleaner, better future. Just review that and know the high points, that individuals matter, and the story behind it. For the next thing here, we have section 1, and these slides are divided up into the different sections from the text, and then it starts off with each of the different essential questions or topics that will be studied in that section. So we have the definition of some key terms in environment, and a quote here, and this might be from Albert Einstein. I can't remember. It says, "The environment is everything that isn't me." And so anything around you is considered to be the environment. And environmental science is the interdisciplinary study of all of that, including these big ideas, as well as the stuff on the next slide. How nature works, environment affects us, how we affect the environment, deal with environmental problems, and how to live more sustainably. We have these 3 different principles of sustainability that we'll be covering or reviewing or coming back to every single chapter. So make sure that you know these: reliance on solar energy, biodiversity, and chemical cycling, also known as nutrient cycling down here. Evolution. For some reason, these PowerPoint presentations duplicate images, so you see them twice. We have natural capital as being a part of sustainability. And natural capital is made up of these 2 things: natural resources and natural services. And there's a slide here to show a little bit more visual representation of that. So we have things like resources, like mineral, soil, energy, land, and then we have the services, which is the air purification, water, food production, those sorts of things. And both of those equal our total natural capital that we have as a population to use. Nutrient cycling. We have some natural capital degradation. We can see some stark boundaries here of probably where countries or states or something like that border, and one country is managing, one country is not. We have resources. Resources are anything that we use in order to meet our needs, and we have a couple different types, or 3 different types. We have perpetual, we have renewable, and we have non-renewable. And the key difference between renewable and non-renewable is that the renewable will be able to recoup themselves within, we say, our last lifetime: forests, grasslands, air, soil, things like that. Now, the highest rate that we can use renewable resources is called sustainable yield without degrading them. Then we have our non-renewable resources. Things we can do in order to manage them are reuse, recycle, and then of course, the reduce. So we have this little kid reusing bottles. Recycling. We have countries that end up having an unequal share of how much of the natural capital they use in the world. And so we have a couple different key terms here: gross domestic product and per capita. The main difference here is that per capita is per person in that country, gross domestic is the total. We have 3 different types of countries: more developed, less developed, and then the last one that's not on here is the least developed. And you can see the countries for more and less, and some of the least would be things like Haiti, Niger, Kenya, most of the African countries. And we can see a slide here that visually represents them. Some of these very, very poor countries, and most of them in Africa, except for South Africa down here, are going to be our least developed countries. Then we have the middle here, and then we have the high popular or high economic countries like the United States, Canada, and most of Europe. So section 2, we're talking about ecological footprints, which is something that will carry through for the rest of the year as well. While living on this earth, whether we intend to or not, we cause environmental degradation. I don't think anybody actually goes out into the world and says, I'm going to use up different resources just to use them. However, in order to survive, we need things. And so we use this capital and we degrade it, and there are ways to do so unsustainably and ways to do so sustainably. So here's some natural capital degradation. Some of the things that degrade natural capital are pollution. And we'll focus on many different types of pollution throughout the year. This is just a general, broad perspective of pollution. We have point sources and we have non-point sources. The main difference is that a point source, you can tell exactly where that pollution comes from. For example, a smokestack from a factory. Non-point sources would be things like runoff from a field into a stream or pesticides blown into the air. We have two different main types of pollutants. Biodegradable, which are things that can degrade, things like yard waste, garden wastes, and non-degradable, things like plastic or glass. Two different ways that we can deal with this, either pollution cleanup or pollution prevention. Prevention is going to be the one that is cheaper, more effective, and easier to manage. However, we tend to use pollution cleanup, which is the after fact. There are a lot of problems with that. We did some work with Tragedy of the Commons, and in order to define Tragedy of the Commons, we first have to define where that phrase would come from, and it has to do with the different types of property rights there are. And so there's private property, common property, and open access. And these two here, the common property and the open access, are the ones that can be degraded through the Tragedy of the Commons. There are different solutions that we can look at in terms of this. And there's really two ways to deal with this. One is to try to institute some kind of governmental policy to deal with it. The other one is to turn things into private ownership. The idea being if you care about your own property, then you're going to manage it more effectively. This becomes more difficult to do, though, with things like open access resources, like air or the ocean. When we talk about ecological footprint, we can do so in terms of a whole as well as per person. When your footprint is unsustainable, it means that you are using more of the resources available to us than what the biological capacity is for replenishment, so the total population of the Earth. A couple of pictures of the differences of less developed and more developed countries. So we have here, you can see here that the United States, in terms of its total biological capacity and ecological footprint, makes up about 25% of that ecological footprint. And in per capita, we also max out the chart, almost by a factor of 2, more than a factor of 2 actually. European Union is next. Now we can see from this graph that at our current rate, we cannot sustain the total population of the Earth. We need about 30% more Earth than we have. And we can project that into the future and see what that would be and what an unsustainable living would be and a sustainable living. I believe these are two different projected footprints that could be possible, as well as anything in between. There was one projected footprint model that showed if we continue moving at the same rate we are right now, by the year 2035, we could need these 2 Earths worth of natural capital in order to support the entire population on the planet. We have this IPAT, or a way to determine our environmental impact, which is I, and it's a factor of these 3 things: population, affluence, and technology. We can see that in less developed countries, one of the factors that's going to matter more is how much population there is. It tends to be higher population growth. In countries like China, India, you can see a huge population when we compare it to the United States or European Union countries. Now we have, however, a less consumption per person in less developed countries. But when we look at the technology, um, we can see that some of this environmental impact can be lessened through technology. Things like windmills or hydroelectric power, ways to use energy sustainably, or ways to use technology for prevention, cleanup, education. And that's going to matter more in our more developed countries than in our less developed countries. So we have this lessening or this mitigating factor in technology, as well as the uh, natural degradation part. And we have then the environmental impact. So we can see that just because we have uh, maybe a larger population or a smaller population or more of a consumption, we can end up with about the same environmental impact from each. So we need to make sure that we're including everything in terms of environmental impact to highlight those differences. Oh, China. Yep. So China is up and coming, and they are doing bad things in terms of the environment. Uh, and I believe there's been some progress there uh, in terms of trying to change how they produce energy and clean up their cities, but it's gotten very bad in the last couple decades. Ecological tipping point is this irreversible shift from some kind of environmental degradation or natural capital degradation. Things like climate change, overfishing, and species extinction are right here at this tipping point. And once we push that past that tipping point, we say that we reach the point of no return. And we can't push this ball back uphill, or if we try, it becomes very, very difficult. So the goal here is to prevent that tipping point from occurring. We want to keep it here or move it back the other direction so that we're living in a more sustainable way. And again, those three things that we're dealing with right now that we know are at that tipping point or very close are climate change, overfishing, and species extinction. Over the last 12,000 years, humans have been evolving from we left our hunter-gatherers ways, and we've gone through three major cultural events, which is the agricultural revolution, the industrial, medical, and informational globalization. A lot of times this one's shortened to industrial, and this one's shortened to technological. Right now, we are entering or need to enter this idea of a sustainable revolution so that the way that we use our resources are done in a way where future generations will be able to have the same opportunities that we have. We can see during this course of history then the population booms occurred at the Industrial Revolution and Industrial Medical Revolution. This one was the most influential in terms of population growth, things like antibiotics and vaccines. I was hoping to show you something else first. We're going to see here that possibly in the future this technological revolution will prevent an additional population growth and will actually level the population out in the next 50 to 100 years. Section 3, got two left. Why do we have environmental problems? Well, four major things: population growth, wasteful and unsustainable resource use, poverty, and then failure to include the harmful environmental costs into the prices that we pay for goods and services. So we have those. Here's the picture I wanted to show you of the population growth. We can see here that due to this globalization and technology and education, the exponential growth of the population may end up leveling off somewhere between 8 and 10 billion people. Like the Black Plague, or Black Death Plague, definitely hit the population hard. That's where that dip comes from. Affluence. This is not a disease. It is high levels of consumption, which then produces high levels of pollution, and then we waste or unnecessarily use resources. And I'm sure you can come up with many different things in your own life where this is true. Affluence can provide funding for the developing countries to reduce these things. So, since countries like the United States and the European Union are rich and do these things, we can help the developing countries take a different path, and also, hopefully, all the while changing what we do as well. Poverty. We have high population growth in low and high poverty countries. We have malnutrition and usually premature death, and also this limited access to adequate sanitation and facilities of clean water. So these are the types of harmful environmental and health effects of poverty. A little bit of a sobering chart. Last one here, I believe, is that the prices do not include the value of natural capital. And what we do with our economy very frequently is subsidize companies in order to, what we say, stimulate the economy. And by doing so, we don't have the customers pay for the environmental costs, or even the companies. We do it through subsidies or taxes. They also don't include the harmful environmental effects. And here's the tax breaks and subsidies and the um, stimulation of the economy. Read a statistic once that if we paid for gasoline to include all of the different environmental costs, it would cost somewhere around $8 a gallon. It's not because of these tax breaks and subsidies, and that we're just not including those environmental costs. We'll deal with that later with pollution cleanup is the idea. All right. We have different worldviews. We have this planetary management worldview, stewardship worldview, and environmental wisdom worldview. And there are the three different ways that individuals tend to look at how we deal with the Earth and how we impact the environment. Planetary, we are separate. Stewardship is the Earth is for us, so we should manage it. Environmental wisdom is that we are not separate from the environment. We are part of it and must somehow engage in it to have a sustainable use. Section 4, last section. If we're going to have an environmentally sustainable society, we want to make sure that our needs are met while also current, or not just current, but future generations' needs will also be met. So we want to live with that natural capital without diminishing how much there is for future generations. So the idea is, how can we do this? Well, we can encourage things like communication, cooperation, and hope, and discourage things like closed-mindedness, polarization, and fear. One of the case studies they highlight in the text is this Chattanooga, Tennessee, to show that these sorts of things are possible. In 1960, it was one of the most polluted cities in the United States. And now in 1995, actually about 20 years ago, they have they've met those goals that they envisioned in 2000, excuse me, in 1984. So 5 years before their goal, and we'll be revisiting it in the future. There's Chattanooga. One of the important themes that this chapter highlights at the end is that individuals matter. This is also the theme of the Lorax, where he throws the seed to the boy at the very end of the story, that it only takes one person to change things. And we can see that it only takes about 5 to 10% of a population that can bring about major social change. So never think that you're just one person. We have only 50 to 100 years to make that change before we reach that tipping point, or those are some projections that some environmental scientists have made. And we have then rely on renewable energy, protect biodiversity, and reduced waste and pollution. So those are the three main things that we could focus on, or that environmental scientists tell us that we should focus on in order to have the sustainable future. Then we have the three big ideas. Review those. All right, so that's the end. One last note here. This chapter focuses heavily on summarizing the entire year. That being said, we'll revisit things from this chapter very specifically for the rest of the year. Also, um, this chapter focuses a lot on sustainability and what I would call environmentalism, or the sort of the political and social network and machine that's in place to try and get people to change how they live. And I want to say that that is not the goal of the course. The goal of the course is to um, look at these issues and get as much information that we can in order to uh, decide whether or not those sorts of changes are necessary. And so I want to make sure that you do not look at this course as an environmentalist course and more of an environmental science course. That was a little bit more than 20 minutes. I was hoping to get done in about 15, so that was a little bit longer than I was going for, but we will see how things work in the future and if I can shorten it up some. All right.